Aloha. I just had the opportunity to interview Lion Martinez, who is a multiple world champion masters athlete. He is the M35 100-meter world champion, M40 100, 200-meter world champion, I believe, and the European champion. So definitely champion mentality, but also he's been coaching since 1998, and he coaches youth athletes and masters athletes. I think he has a wealth of knowledge, and I was extremely honored to be able to interview him today to break down some really simple beginning sprint techniques. I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. Mahalo again, Lion. That was great. Aloha, Cynthia Monteleone, and I am so excited to bring to you today a conversation with one of my favorite masters athletes, Lion Martinez. And thank you so much for making the time difference work and joining me to discuss sprinting today.
Likewise, and thank you so much for making it happen. So yeah, happy to be here.
All right. So Lion is one of my favorite commenters on social media. He definitely tells it like it is. And I would say I definitely just am always in agreement, like on the same page with all of the things that he says. And I think it's actually very generous of you, Lion, to offer your opinion, because it's so professional. And it's, like I said, usually spot on. Of course, we have all different opinions. And so sometimes it's just your opinion, and that's fine. Other people can have different opinions. But I really enjoy reading your contributions. And I really am excited that you contributed to my book, because like I said, you're one of my favorite masters athletes. What age group are you in now? Did you age up to 40?
Yeah, I'm in 40. Yeah, I'm in 42 yeah. 2 more years, and then 45. So
okay,
in the middle there. Yeah.
In the middle, yeah. I lose track of time with COVID and everything. So.
Oh yeah, I mean, yeah. I understand. Yeah. You can't keep track of everybody either. So.
Yeah. So you're sprinting very fast for your age as well. So you are also fast over 40, and you're consistently fast, and you're consistently at the top of your game in your sprints. And so I guess what I wanted to ask you about today, your opinion about, is beginning sprint techniques. And I know it's hard to talk about it instead of show it. We all probably need a coach, and that's something maybe you can comment on. But I guess what the question I always get from my beginning athletes in my warrior community is, what about my form? And I try to cover a couple of the basics, but I would love to hear your opinion about the basics. So when you're coaching an athlete or giving someone advice, like, where do you start?
Sure, yeah, and I think this is the hardest part of coaching, and I fall into the same trap myself of conveying too much information and overbearingly try to make someone do something that they're not accustomed to yet. So I think it's very important to take it step by step. And I think step number one is really just looking at the athlete and seeing the movements and what are the drivers, the nervous system drivers of what the brain wants the body to do when it wants to go faster, because we do different things, especially when we're not accustomed to sprinting. Yeah, you know as well as I do that sprinting is a trained form, so it's not supernatural. It just becomes more natural when you practice a lot, because even running away from something in fear is running really fast. It's not sprinting. So I try to do that first. Let's see what this particular person does right, and then we complement on that, and then we look at what can we improve upon, and then we take one thing and we work on that for a couple of sessions and see if we can make it better. So and I always try to look at it from the feet up first, and then go up to the hips and everything else. Usually it starts with the feet if you're not used to it. You're flat foot or you land on your heel, and usually that's a problem, right? If they're landing on the front.
Number one things that people say is that they heel strike. They tend to heel strike.
Yeah. And you can see that early in kids too. You have kids that are going to heel strike. They're usually better at different distances in sports, because it's a more balanced thing. The body wants to put the whole foot down to be balanced instead of creating velocity. So, and neither is bad or good. It's just different things, right? So, and then we see what can we do to correct that. Is it coming from a misunderstanding? Usually when you're not used to it, it's just you don't know what to do. If they're an athlete coming from a different sport, it might be that they are trained for different things. They might also be weak in certain areas. So we have to try and isolate certain things and see if we can improve upon those. But always try to start as easy and simple as possible and just have people run a few times and see what happens.
Okay, so starting from the feet up, so you're looking at the foot position, and then let's say, I know because sprint form also changes whether you're in the beginning of your sprint or in the middle of your sprint. So let's say like 100-meter sprint. We'll just take that 100-meter sprint. So you're starting at a more drive position, and you want to get that velocity going. And then you're going to come open up into a form where it allows you to utilize your stride. So how would you kind of break that down from the feet up, like maybe in the first, beginning phase? How long would you say the drive phase is out of 100 meters?
Yeah, for
For
sure.
we'll say for a beginner sprinter, or should it be the same for everyone?
Right. So no, super important question. I think that's also a good method to use. As in the beginning, you start off with acceleration because it can come more natural, not in particular technique, but just falling forward will force you to put your foot down, your feet down, and push. Usually, you're not going to fall on your face. Your brain is not going to allow you to fall on your face. So it's a good way of starting. Like you start with people just doing false starts, as in
So they're
falling down
so
and then
they're
catching
standing up and
themselves.
then they're just leaning forward.
Yeah, that's one. And different types of starting just to see again how they move. But that's a good way to go about it. And if you can accelerate properly, usually you can reach your optimal top speed as well in a pretty comfortable manner. There are different types of sprinters, though. You're going to see that as well. You're going to see those that are better at accelerating and creating velocity initially in the race, and then you're going to have those that are more natural top speed sprinters. And that's also something you have to categorize, and then you put them in different frameworks of learning different traits and techniques, and so it blends, and you're never going to perfect anything, we just make some progress. So I definitely to get someone to accelerate properly, usually resistance is awesome, because everything we do is from the hip, especially when you're pushing. And you just put a sled in, either put a sled so they can pull it, but that's usually a little bit more advanced. I like just putting something that's really heavy in front of someone and then having them move it rather than
So like
accelerating their own mass.
a
Yeah,
push
that puts them
sled.
in a good position. Yes, a prowler or anything, even a big one of those big benches you have in a gym hall, for example, that are on small wheels, they're heavy, so they can't go up in speed too much. That's another thing. If you do something really slow, just as learning an instrument, it's much easier to get it down. We start
Yeah,
there and then we increase the intensity of it. So that's a good thing, I think, to do. I still do it myself now, then, just to put myself in the position of having that triple extension through the body,
yeah.
and not overstriding too much, and making sure we're utilizing the glutes and the hammies, and of course the hip flexors as well,
Right.
the
So
most important
the
muscles.
hips
Yeah.
are extremely important. And so they're in
Yeah.
that acceleration phase, that by leaning down and pushing something, they're
Hmm.
kind of forced to drive the knee up, right? And then have that
Yeah.
dorsiflex, which I talked about.
Yes.
But the dorsiflex is the toe up, which is
Mhm.
the optimal position to strike, because then you're striking right on the balls of your feet.
Yeah.
For beginning sprinters, that's where you want to hit on your foot, not your heel, right? So to
Exactly.
propel yourself forward. And I think that's a great point that you said, to begin with the resistance, because if you're just sprinting with your body weight at first, and I always tell my sprinters, like, don't go top speed, don't go your max, because you need to really strengthen your muscles. And of course, strength training is a big part of that. But
Hmm.
just the memorization of that movement through sprinting, I think that you can really get a lot of strength from pushing something in those particular muscles. So, the easy way to do that also without pushing something is I have people start walking up hills and then jogging up hills, very slow progression. But the same thing, it forces you to drive your knee and use your hip flexors, like you were saying. So I think that's extremely important. And what are they doing with their arms when say if they're falling, they're doing a falling start? What should their arms do?
Right. So, and just to go back to one thing you said there, first,
Yeah.
for example, that if walking uphill is super. I mean, especially if it's very steep too. You don't have to do
Mhm.
many steps, but just, and then you can observe them, how they move. I still go back and do that sometimes myself as well.
Oh, that's
I
awesome.
like that, it's undulating emphasis. Like you do a couple of things 1 month, and then you do another couple of things the next month, and then you go back and do a couple more and see, have we progressed. So that's super important. And another question we just want to touch on is how long a dry phase should be. It depends on how fast the athlete is, of course. Slower sprinters are going to reach their top velocity earlier, which is strange, one might think, but their
Right.
top speed is lower than a faster sprinter, which will continue to accelerate. So that's a whole different is a whole
Do
different thing.
you think that's maybe because they're stronger, that they're able to keep that drive phase going longer?
Yeah, and I would say it's not as they're staying in their drive. It's more, it's of course strength and power, and then it turns into velocity. But it's basically you're just traveling further. If the acceleration curve continues, then
Right.
you're moving away from the slower athlete if they're running at the same time. So it's
Right.
like biomechanics and physics, really. So, and before we go to the next question, there was a Diamond League the other week. I had an athlete who ran into B heats. Luckily, they had a top speed meter going at the same
Oh,
time.
neat.
Yeah, it's super nice to have. So it's live top speed indications.
Hmm.
And my athlete and I think his name is from Canada. He did 10:15 in the heats. It was a super good time.
Wow.
And my athlete did 10:5. It's still a PB
Um,
for him.
Great.
But
Congratulations. Mhm.
thank you very much. Thank you. The funny thing was that he reached his top speed at, say, 55 meters. And when I was looking
Okay.
at it first, I saw, well, so my athlete, how far behind is he? But then I realized, well, he's also reaching it at 55. It's just that it took him longer in the rate. It took him longer to come to 55 because his
Mm.
dry phase is suboptimal, right? So then we know what we have to work on compared to world-class athletes. So I think it's
Uh-huh.
more of, again, if you're a slower athlete, you're going to reach your top speed earlier because you don't have the mechanics, you don't have the muscle strength, and of course the rate of force and everything. Don't have to go into
Right.
detail
Right. That's what I
to
was thinking. Every
keep
time
going.
you're
Yeah,
striking, the force
yeah.
that's like the stronger your legs are, right? You're putting more force on the track, which is
Hmm.
propelling you forward
Yeah,
faster. Like just to
right.
be
So what
just to be simple about it.
exactly?
Yeah.
So the result is, say that it took him, say, 55 meters. So say, just make it 6 seconds. 6 seconds. The faster athlete at 55 meters, or sorry, at 6 seconds has reached his top speed. Yeah, and my athlete hasn't come to that point yet,
Right.
but he's further back in the race. It's kind of weird, but that's what happens. But anyway, moving forward. So, what was the
That,
question now?
that was a great example though. And to break it down that everybody's different. And
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So I was talking about the next question was say when a beginning sprinter is doing the falling drill, what should their
Right,
arms
the
be
arms.
doing? Yeah. Because we
Yeah,
talked
yeah.
about the hip flexors need to be strong and the legs need to drive up. That's something I am really terrible with, by the way.
Hmm.
Whenever I do when you stand on top of your blocks and you fall forward, that's another method, right? You fall forward off the top of your blocks. You're supposed to do that, the knee drive up. My knee does not drive up. So in comparison, because I'm a 400-meter runner mostly, I'm that athlete that we talked about earlier that the drive phase is not so strong, but my top speed, my form, that's where I get going. So I say in a 200 meters, man, everyone blows by me on the first
Mm,
100, but then I just start reeling them in on that straightaway.
yeah.
So that's what type of sprinter I am, because that's how I'm trained, of course. So I adjusted my training a little bit more. I spent like maybe 6 weeks on a little bit more starts and a little bit more just faster workouts, not as
Hmm.
much of the lactic work, and was able to improve my 200 time this year, which was really exciting. Had a master's PR. But
Fantastic.
that's like just a comparison of these nuances between sprinting. So we
Oh
classify
yeah, yeah,
sprinting
yeah.
usually from anywhere from 50 meters to 400 meters, but there's a lot of differences and nuances within that realm. So my question though, back to the question was, falling drill, what should the arms be doing?
Right. Yeah. So yeah, well, of course, always want to look at the opposite split. So left leg goes forward, right arm goes forward.
Okay.
And yeah, so and here's the thing though, there's about 4 out of 5 sprinters usually start with their left leg forward because it's a
Okay.
stronger leg.
Let's see.
Yeah, you want this.
Yeah,
Yeah,
my left leg is usually forward. That's right. Yeah.
yeah. 4 out of 5 sprinters do that. Four out of
Okay.
five human beings like to put balance on their left leg. Say that you're kicking a soccer ball, you put your left leg as the
Hmm.
power balance of the body, and then you swing with the right leg, which is the faster leg. And you want that because that's the back leg, so it's going to come forward faster and catch you,
Hmm.
right? So that's usually how it goes. But there's 1 out of 5 that usually struggles with that, and which opposite, which is kind of the correlates with being left-handed as well.
Oh, I
So
was
I think
wondering.
it's
I was going to ask that. Yeah.
yeah, I think it's about
Okay.
20% or something like that. So and so you want to see, so one thing you want to see is it sync? Does that actually happen that the opposite arm is going forward? And then of course there's Tom Tellez who coached Carl Lewis said something which I kind of like, which is thumb to the eye, elbow to the sky.
Ooh, that's really
So
great
yeah,
too.
so the thumb goes up here about, not
Hmm.
higher than that at least, and then the elbow on the opposite side goes parallel, so that's up here, but
Hmm.
not more than that.
Okay.
And this part will
Yeah.
mimic the bottom part of the leg, the shin part of the leg
Same
of the opposite
same
leg.
angle. Is that what you mean?
Same angle, yeah. So that's what you want to see. But then, I mean, you can go into smaller details, just as we talked about. How does the landing happen with the foot? Is it too far in front of the body, creating braking forces?
Hmm.
What's the angle of the shin then? And also, are we using correct dorsiflexion, as you mentioned? And dorsiflexion is, of course, the toes going up, and then there's a plantar flexion, with the toes going down.
Right.
And some science behind that is pretty interesting to me because what happens when you're utilizing the tibialis tendon in front of the leg is that it lifts the toes up, which stretches the calf. And if
Hmm.
it stretches the calf muscle, the plantar flexion comes down with about twice as much force, which means you
Ooh.
have twice as much force holding yourself. So often when you see sprinters dipping their toes, which usually new sprinters do, is
Hmm.
because first of all, the brain is looking for balance. So it's going to go like this. It's like going down a stair. They don't know
Aha.
exactly that timing. So they're coming down like this. They haven't stretched the calf, which means this happens. They collapse at the
Aha.
ankle. So the whole foot comes down and it becomes a very slow action where the
Great.
basically the front side of the leg, the quads will bear all of the weight, and it's a slow movement. So that's usually what I look for. I look for the arm action splitting
Hmm.
correctly, and then I
So,
look for the
and
the leg is coming down in the plantar flexion.
do you have a well, I have another question about the arm action in
Yep.
a second, but when you were just describing that, that was a really awesome description. And again, it's like so hard without being on the track together and
Yeah,
explaining it, but
yeah,
that was like really good because we also just had our guest strength coach last month gave us some anterior tibialis work because we
yeah.
find that the beginning sprinters are having calf issues sometimes or plantar issues or Achilles issues. And I think it's because they're not used to that force coming down like that. So the anterior tibialis was really like a gold mine for strengthening to protect against that, and also for shins, of course, too. But okay,
And
my
that's
yeah,
I didn't interrupt you, sorry, but
no, no, go
that's
ahead.
I think if we would look more to that, but I mean, I understand it's super complex, but as sprinters, we come down with 7 to 10 times our body weight on that little
Yes.
space of the toe,
Mm-hmm.
right, or the foot. If that timing, if you can get that timing in better, I think there'd be much less injuries and shin splints and such. And I think people are looking for fixes, as in, they buy insoles and they buy these things, and they
Mm.
tried doing calf races and stuff when it's really just about that timing. This is also why I'm a big proponent for drills. I put all new sprinters and my old sprinters and myself on, we do drills. I'm a big believer, either you believe in it or you don't, and I believe in it if you're super specific with it. So we train that timing all the time to get up and down and just touch, touch, touch. And I think that helps 90% of those problems mostly.
That's a great point. And we can talk about drills too. There's so much to talk about. But
Yeah.
so the arm action, my question was, is there a cue that you give your athletes for, okay, so maybe they're beginning and they're going to go through it slowly to try to get to their position. But at some point they want to be like quick with that arm action, right? So is there any kind of cue that you give your athletes for like coming out, like making a quick, like my coach always tells me, I mean, he doesn't have a specific clue, but he tells me like, this is too slow for me. Like, I can't get that, I need to get that reaction a little bit
Yeah.
faster. Is there any kind of cue that you give or what you say
I
to
think it
get
also
that
depends.
going fast?
Yeah,
Or do
fully
you just
understand it.
let them go slow until they kind of get the motion right?
Yeah, fully understand. So again, I try to put myself in an observation mode, and I think either you have an athlete that just isn't moving fast enough, they're not propelling their arms around fast enough. But then I see more people having problem with doing a bigger swing of the arms, because when you're accelerating, your levers are moving in a big range of motion compared to later. I mean, I'm not saying it's a small range of motion when you're up and sprinting, but when you're tilted like this and you have to move your leg up here and back here from a position where your mass is still against gravitational pull, right? So it's a big range of motion that's going to happen, which means you have to counteract with a big motion around the arms. But if you're already suited to that, yeah, then you might have to want to do it quicker to explode out. But I find both happen, but mostly I find that we need bigger arm action with the athletes I coach and newer ones. They're kind of this is also another thing. I think, especially if you haven't done sports, then there's weaknesses. And I'm going to be a little bit stereotypical here, but generally, if you look at elite male sprinters and you look at elite female sprinters, there's a bigger discrepancy in arm action from elite female sprinters to amateur or beginner female sprinters, because there's a bigger gap in upper body strength. I see often newer sprinters, female sprinters, are a little bit weaker over, in the deltoids and the scapula, and they can't really create those big forces, so they want to go small. While there's a smaller discrepancy between male elite sprinters,
because they have a
guys can offer
natural
a little bit
strength.
more natural
Are
upper
you
body
telling
strength.
me, Lion, that men are different from women?
I might.
I don't know that that's fashionable to say these days.
Yeah.
That
But
male
this
and
is the
female
thing.
sprinters have a
Yeah.
difference. But no,
But
I know what you're saying.
there's a positive thing about that, because I at the same time I feel that if we train female athletes exactly like elite male athletes, we're not going to get the results we want for different reasons. There's lots of hormonal reasons, there are social reasons, there are anatomical reasons that we need to factor in. And I don't think there's enough research on it. So if we don't put this on the table, how are we going to become optimal? It's just a case that we see. There are more female sprinters that show discrepancies in their arm action, right? So sometimes it's just a matter of, we need to go and bench a few times. Maybe 100 pounds isn't enough, if you want to reach the next level. So I mean, I'm not saying that fixes it, but
my strength coach has me do a lot of bent over rows, seated rows, and then I also do I do a lot of shoulder work, and I do a lot of chin-ups and pull-ups.
Yeah, so, that's traditionally tough exercises for women.
Yes.
I know that. I think the average for a untrained woman is almost like half of one of a pull-up.
Yes,
yeah,
that's
because
correct.
it's just it's biology, right? So, but just doing those movements for the lats and the deltoids and the the pulls and the pushes and everything, I think it just 100% helps.
Yeah.
So
do you see?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm up to, I think my max was 14 or 15 this past summer when I was, doing reps. So, and I was doing several sets of those. So yeah. But I didn't start there. I started at 3, I believe, when I first started strength training. So you got to start somewhere. And the ladies who I train, when they can't do a pull-up, I have them do the negative, where they're holding for, I try to have them hold for 15 to 30 seconds. Some of them, of course, can't hold that long, but doing the negative, meaning jumping up and coming down slowly, way better for developing that than assisted pull-ups, which you see ladies in the gym on those sometimes on those machines, what I'm talking about, where it lifts them up, and I'm like, oh my God, like they're just wasting their time right now. But yeah, so I would definitely recommend the negatives over the assisted pull-ups. But the arm action, back to the arm action, Do you find that beginning sprinters, if they're doing, like the falling drill or starting off with that big arm action, that they're sacrificing the largeness of the arm action for trying to go quicker, and so it makes it smaller? Does that make sense? Like, so I'm trying to go fast and I know that it's taking me longer to go here and here, even though that's actually probably going to get me further. And so maybe I want to go fast, so I shorten it and I stay really like tight and short. Does that, I feel like I see that. Do you see that as well?
I do. Yeah, I think it comes down to the one of the key points, which especially if you're from a team, if you are from a team sport, say soccer or similar, you confuse quick with fast, right? So quick is really short and snappy, and fast is velocity, right? We're trying to reach a top velocity and keep it for as long as possible, and we do certain things to reach that point. And there's always, again, I mean, depending on who you are, you're going to have to want to work on different things. So there's not like one thing. It's just like, what does the athlete look like? And is there something is there a cue we can find to teach this athlete to do it more as it should be?
Right.
But then there are small quirks that people do too that takes too long to work out, and it just
Yeah.
works. Some people really bend or really don't, they really don't open up at the elbow, and it's just like that short lever going on, and sometimes that works. Some people have some certain quirks that, I mean, if they're not on an Olympic level, you can't spend that time to just work that out because it sacrifices everything else. So there's some certain things that can be acceptable.
Right. Okay. So they're coming out in the drive phase, and then they're slowly, right, transitioning, not a fast transition. I think that may be something else we could point out, is that when you're coming out of the drive phase, you don't want to just pop up straight into your full range of motion phase. So is there any cue that, or how can you describe that transition? Does that make sense?
And that's one of those old things that most coaches seem to have a hard time doing, and I think a lot, especially over here, a lot of coaches haven't run that fast. They haven't sprinted that fast themselves. So they do the classic stay low, stay down, stay low. It's like maybe the athlete just can't do that. They don't know how to do it because they just, there's several reasons why. And if we start from the top, our brains are wired to see what's going on around us. You have to train that out of the system again, because that the natural thing, especially under pressure, when our reptile minds strike, when the nervous system just get to do whatever it wants, and it's a panic situation, it's going to come up because we want to use our eyes. So you come up and look, and then you get stressed because you see people still accelerating, so they're down here, and you're like, oh, right, and you keep making the same mistake because you're afraid of doing the mistake. And so that cue has to go first of all, and then the first thing you have to do is really make sure is the athlete strong enough to stay there, because it's a lot of force needed. Because what you're doing again, you are releasing the pressure against the ground, so you're falling and you're catching yourself and you're pushing, so you're going forward. And ultimately, the best thing you can do as a coach is have the athlete feel the release of gravity, because when that happens, then you are ready to start going to top speed. So it's a little philosophical, but it's the same thing. It's a wired thing in the nervous system. And how to prolong that, again, I would, put some resistance on there, because that makes it takes them longer to get to a top speed position. It slows them down so they can do it in a more methodical fashion. Also, what I like to coach, which is that, the biomechanical term is triple extension, and that's just going like this. You have the head and you have the hip and everything down here, and then most masters, specifically and new sprinters, do that, because
I did that. I'm getting
right,
better, but it was really hard for me to get out of that.
And it's natural. That's okay. This is what we want to do, is utilize this part. This is the heaviest part of the body. It's the gluteus, it's the quads and everything. It's the hip. So everything we do in drills, when we're pushing and we're putting in our position, standing against, say, a fence, and you're just, you're moving your hip back to forth. So you're feeling that hip coming forward. So it's a sequence of push back both feet or one foot if you're accelerating, then you feel the hip traveling forward, hip displacement,
Mm-hmm.
and then the knee comes forward. In that order. If you do that order wrong, then this is going to be wrong and it's not going to be optimal.
Mm-hmm.
However, being human beings, we're kind of good at creating a lot of force, slow force. So it means that we're going to expend too much energy and we decelerate towards the end of the race. A lot of people say, like, I need more, I need more speed endurance. What you probably need more of an optimal drive phase again. So
Yeah, that's a
you're
good
using
point.
right muscles. Yeah. So you want to minimize the time of
So you're
deceleration.
more efficient. You're saying be more efficient at the beginning of your race as
Yes.
opposed to the end of it.
So what we do is a lot of what I like to do is a lot of that, train the hip displacement from coming from a completely still position, move the hip forward and then push, 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 push. Some people use pull, if they like that. I like push, and then have them push things, and that is going to improve. And every time we go into a session and we have block starts or accelerations, we do certain drills to make that stick. One of the drills I do is, you mentioned just standing on the blocks and falling. I like to do as you're standing in the blocks and you go down, say that this is a block, and then you put your foot down. So your foot is a little bit, so you're still in balance. You're not standing like this on the block. You're just coming down a little bit. And then you're squatting down. You squat down. There's only one way of going forward from that, and that is doing, say, a hip thrust movement. So you're squatting down, and to get this way, which is the track, then you need to push your glutes forward. Otherwise, you're going nowhere. So that teaches them the movement of pushing down, hip goes forward, you're in a drive phase, and try to just stay there until you feel the gravity loosen up. And of course, this is not a weak thing. This is a career thing where you improve. But I feel like those things, hip forward, squat in the blocks and push your hips forward. Push a prowler, pull a sled when you're getting advanced enough to do that.
Sorry to interrupt. What about, do you ever have like someone have a band around the waist of another, and then they can hold, so like there's something wrapped around, usually a band, and then someone's pulling resistance. So you're trying to drive against that resistance. So maybe that one.
Yeah, same principle. Definitely. Yeah, because especially when the band is around the hip, because then the natural feeling is I'm moving my hip here because something is pulling it back. So it's a natural movement. I think that's a great thing to do.
And I think I've seen people also do it with a fence. If you don't have someone to hold it behind you, you can they have these bands tied to the fence, and then they're around their waist, and they're doing that drive hip flexor action, with the fence holding them basically. So
absolutely.
Absolutely. Okay, awesome.
All those are good.
Okay, so you mentioned something about how it's natural for us to look up. Also, I am guilty of this. Sometimes I've trained myself out of it now for the most part, but when, starting blocks are probably a little advanced for beginning sprinters, but we'll touch on that anyway. When you're in the blocks, or, if you're just doing a 3-point start or whatever, you mentioned that you want to keep your head, you didn't say keep your head down, but you said that we have a tendency to want to look around, but that's not optimal, right? So, so instead of coming right up, which actually also has, when you look up, your whole body comes up too quickly, maybe. So what,
I mean,
how do you?
It controls the whole thing. Yeah, the body and the eyes control
that, or like.
Yeah. So what we can do if we want to be really methodical about it is, especially if someone's struggling with it, either they're doing this because they're overcompensating, or they're doing that because they don't feel comfortable. And there are more things. And again, we don't have to go into all details, but usually it correlates when you're coming out of the blocks like this. And it's hard to show now, but what usually happens is, if this is the leg, it comes out down, like down or forward, because you're falling too much. You're putting your foot forward. So the forces go here instead of here, right? It goes here. That forces the body up too. So it's usually a bad combination. You go like this, you put your foot out, push down, body goes up.
Right.
So it's not always just here.
Right. And when I like that you do that, because a lot of beginning sprinters think when they hear like stay low, like you said, that cue stay low, they think that if they just put their head like this and they hunch over, that's the correct, but it's not about hunching over. It's about that angle. It's really about
that angle
and the angle, not
and
about
it doesn't have to be
keeping, crouched down. You know what I'm talking about, right? You've seen it where we just stay crouched down instead of, and then that's not optimal either, because you're not using that full extension to put the
Yeah.
force on the track.
You're not getting, I mean, you're not putting yourself in a position to drive properly. That's what happens. And
Right.
and it's a regular thing to do. And I think, you know, something else we have to understand is that a master's athlete is not going to be able to hold an angle that a world-class athlete can, due to many biological properties of the muscles and everything. Is a huge amount of strength being able to hold 45 degrees. So a lot of people try to do that and they can't, because if they did, they would fall down, right? So, and between men and women, there's a 10-degree difference. You don't have to be at 45 to do a great race. You put yourself in a position for where you drive. One of our best senior guys in Sweden, he's I mean, he's a low 660, you know, sprinter on the 60 meters, and he I mean, you can always optimize, but he's almost up here because that's where he can properly drive. So this is just an effect of your strength.
Is he taller? Does that make a difference?
Yeah, he's a little bit, you know, he's 6.2, which is not super tall, but he's, you know, he's that more of a, you know, a little bit Bolt kind of built, like Bolt more, you know, so he needs that to drive, and that's how he does it. And if you want to be really methodical, well, to go back then, so there's a progression too. I mean, if you start your athletes up here, next season, see if they can come down 5 degrees, right? And be very specific about it. And then we come down a little bit more. They're going to fall into a trouble somewhere around here anyway, right? So start them up here instead of coming here to here. Yeah. And then count steps. Let's start with 3 steps, 3 steps of drive, staying down, so to speak, or creating triple extension. 5 weeks later, we do 5 steps or 5 strides. Can we do 5 strides? And then we do 7 and 9. But when we start hitting 9 and 10, that's all that's needed. You know, 10 steps. If you're a world-class athlete and you're averaging over 2 meters per stride, you know, you're past 20 meters already. So it might be a few more steps in transition, and then you're at 50. Right. So I think that if we can make a master's athlete drive for 9 strides, then we've done an amazing job.
Yeah.
Like if they're doing this and then they're coming up, and then you have 5 more strides to upright, they're going to have a good day on the track.
That's awesome. That's a really great breakdown. And I think it's really important too that you're specifying the difference between masters and elite and female and male, because I think that you know, sometimes beginners, sprinters, or masters, you know, beginners, masters athletes, that sort of thing, they are looking at workouts, you know, that colleges are doing, or they're looking at workouts and coaching techniques that are being applied to, you know, 20-year-olds. And let's just be honest, it's not quite the same. We can hang on to as much muscle mass as we can, but as we age, you know, sarcopenia, dynapenia, it's you know, it's going to happen. So you and I think are doing a pretty good job of staving that off for the most part, but eventually it catches up to us as we age. And so I think that's really awesome and really important that you specify that, hey, like, you know, that might be a good technique for a 20-year-old, but as a master's athlete, we need to adjust to the, you know, the not as much strength, you know, that sort of thing. So yeah, that's really important. And also I think that sometimes beginner sprinters want instant gratification, and they don't understand that it's taken years to get to this point. You know, like I've been back on the track for 5 years. And so I try to explain to my athletes all the time that are just beginning, like, hey, like, you know, they're like, how come I'm not as fast as you yet? You know, that kind of thing. And I'm like, oh my gosh. Well, I mean, I've been back on the track for 5 years consistently, and strength training and the whole thing. So you can't expect it to happen overnight. You have to work on these progressions slowly. And that's you know, the best way not to get injured as well. I think people are afraid to sprint as adults. Like my big thing is encouraging people who have never sprinted before to try sprinting. Because in my opinion, you don't have more injuries from sprinting. It's actually, you're more likely to get injured from overuse injuries from training for a marathon. And then there's, you know, the whole host of other reasons why that might not be optimal for you as you age. So I really like to encourage people to sprint as their form of exercise, or at least add it to their exercise. And so I think that having in mind this slow progression is the best way, because then, you know, you're less likely to get injured. I think people get injured because they just go, you know, they feel like they have something to prove. I've seen like 40 some year old men get next to the line, you know, with a college kid and they just feel like they have something to prove or something, and then they pull a hamstring. So like, that's not what we're talking about at all. We're talking about learning the techniques, learning the mechanics of it, and moving on from there. And that's, again, that's why remedial wise, I like to start people just walking on the hills, because at least then their body is starting to learn the proper, you know, where their knees and their hips and their feet should be. But I did have another question about, oh, okay. So as we're transitioning into, you know, from the drive phase into the top phase, say in 100 meters. So I was always taught, and it works for me, that my chest should be, you know, kind of up and open, my shoulders back, so that I can really utilize that range of motion. And that works really well for me. Sometimes when people get fatigued, they drop, they're not here anymore, they drop to here. But if you do look at slow motions of 100-meter sprinters, their hands are all the way up here, even though they're moving them very quickly. So what is your opinion about, you know, what your form should look like at the top end?
Yeah. So I think starting off, I think if just 1 second about the transition phase, I think that's where most people, that's where the race will work or not. And I think there's not enough emphasis on that from coaches. It's the most important part.
Yeah, I
If you're
just
going
skipped
from one
over
form,
it.
right? No, but I mean, we know about it. We execute it. But for new sprinters, they don't know what that is. And you never hear someone say, I'm excellent in the transition phase.
Yeah,
You know,
okay.
usually you're excellent in the drive, or you're
Right,
excellent in top speed,
right,
or whatever,
exactly.
sprint endurance. Yeah. So, and it's because it's super hard, because you're changing from one form live into another, and you're doing different things, and you're using different muscle fibers in the beginning of the race in at top speed, right? So there's many things that's going on, and you're also coming up with your head, so you're seeing everybody else. It's psychological and philosophical as well. You're going to be feeling things where also I think a lot of coaches don't understand what that feels like.
Mm-hmm.
Also, what we have to understand is our eyes are, you know, they're convex, like, you know, they're rounded,
Yeah.
right?
Is
So
that concave or
concave, yeah,
yeah.
like a
Okay.
spoon on the back of a spoon. But anyway, so we're usually fooled a little bit about where we are in the race at that point, because usually, and I've through all my years of doing this, as a long time. I also came back, by the way, I was in my fifth year when I was as a master's, when I was performing the best 2 years ago, before everything went to shit. But you know, with the world.
Right,
But
right. Not with you, it's just
so
with the world.
right.
Yeah.
So it took me 5 years to get there. But anyway, so what happens when we come up from the transition phase, or in the transition phase, and we are, and I've talked to a lot of sprinters about that, is that when I run against them, you know, and I have it on camera, and they always say like, well, you know, they always misunderstanding it, saying like, well, I thought you were ahead of me, you know, say we were doing 30 meters or 40-meter sprints. And it's usually never the case, because we are just fooled. So what happens is we start panicking, or we tense up going up into top speed, making us never hit our actual top speed. So it's a very important phase of the race where you have to stay calm and relax and let top speed happen. And top speed is, of course, the, you know, the fountain of youth for us. It's like the one thing that dictates how well we're going to do, if, you know, everything else is sort of similar. We know that the sprinter with the highest top speed at 50 to 60 meters is going to win the race, unless something crazy happens. It's usually what goes, like nine out of 10 races, that's the case. So going from the transition phase and training that and coaching that is super hard, because it's in the middle of the race, right? And you're trying to coach, especially if someone new coming in and they don't know how to do this. Usually you get the pop that thing, and
Right.
you know, and everything. And but then to the point of where your chest and your shoulders should be, if you look at world-class sprinters, they have that little box they're in, right? So it's quite neutral. And then you have deviances for certain sprinters, but mostly what you'll see is what you're explaining. You know, you're standing up pretty tall, and you know, your shoulders, they don't have to be back, but they're not hunched either. Right here is usually a bad way to go, because there's lots of things happening in the back area when you're doing that, and you know, your hips are not going to be optimal. And then, I think that's the best way to try to start learning if you are new. Try to find like what your grandfather and grandmother say, stand up straight. I mean, that's the case, but being relaxed and moving your arms from
Right.
here, and everything else is supplementing that, right? So you're moving your arms and try not to change too much, because it's a form is the same. You're moving it the same way. When you start deviating out of that box you have, that's when you're just going to lose speed. You see, the rocking motion,
Right.
or you see people moving back and forth. They're struggling and fighting with their bodies. It's usually a bad thing. But we all do it at some point. I mean, we're fatigued, or
Fatigue,
we're
right? Fatigue, just
panicking.
you can see it with
It
with
ruins
the
it.
runners.
Yeah.
If
My shoulders
they're
go
as
up when I'm
oh,
trying too hard. That's what
mine
I
too.
do. My shoulders go up.
Me
Right?
too.
Yeah. That's why I want to
Yeah.
create force, right? So I protect myself and I fight
Yeah.
up here. It's not a good
Yep.
thing, right? But I
I
think that's the
when
best way, neutral.
I
Go ahead.
totally agree with that. And that's the same thing that happens to me at the end of my 400 and the end of my 200 for sure. When I ran my 26.08, which was my master's PR, I came off the line, I got my time. And then one of the coaches from one of the other teams, who's an amazing coach, he said, oh, you know what? You would have been sub 26 if you hadn't done this at the end. Like, he's like, you just got to work on that. Which is where the relaxing comes in. I love how you said that you just kind of feel that transition, because I also, it's something that you practice and then you do get the feeling of, and you just feel that transition. And that's where you can, kind of take some breaths and relax. And I consciously now have to tell myself, keep your shoulders down. And that is one of the cues that improved my 200 this year, was, keep your shoulders down and relax. So, my coach had to remind me that my face was getting all scrunched up, like I was doing the grimace, which I sometimes do at the end of my 400 too. So he's like, your cheeks should be really loose and you should stay relaxed the whole race. And it should be that way from the beginning all the way to the end. And I find that breathing really helps me with that. And my way of breathing is maybe not necessarily the same way for everyone else, because the way I breathe is for efficiency. So because I run the 400 again, I take really deep breaths because I want to get as much oxygen to my muscles as possible. And I don't want to hyperventilate. And I think, for 100 meters, the breathing might be different. We can talk about that. But for a 200, at least, I'm still employing that same technique where I like take a deep breath in on the set. And then I have a really long exhale as I drive out. And then I take another really deep breath in, and I kind of like I'm not holding it uncomfortably, but I'm holding it for as long as I can, so that I can then have another deep exhale and really push with that exhale as well. And I just try to keep that breathing the whole way. And as I get tired, towards the end, I consciously am just trying to still take as deep of a breath as I possibly can. And I try to time it with my momentum so that I'm not losing momentum. I almost like put those as like pieces of the puzzle together. So that timing, I memorize, I guess when we practice sprinting, as the faster we go, we memorize that timing of what it should sound like. We even know what it should sound like on the track. Tap, 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 tap. How fast are those taps happening? So it is a lot of it is feeling. And then subconsciously, when we have good competition next to us, that also helps us, kind of with that motivation drive. But yeah, I guess, what are your breathing techniques?
Yeah, and I think that it's super interesting because there is science behind this as well.
Oh yeah, a lot of
And
it.
yeah,
Yeah.
there's and this is something I've always advocated, and I worked a lot with my 200-meter sprinters because they tend to hyperventilate before they came to me, as they try to breathe as in a rhythm, which you can do if you're a 400-meter runner. And I'm not going to go into that because I'm not an expert in it. But when you're running the 200 meters, of course, so backing it up, so the bottom line science is our energy systems are competitive, right? So it adapts to what it thinks the situation is. So if we force hyperventilation, we're going to be forcing more oxygen into the muscles, right? Outside of what we need to use, which is the ATP, creatine, the glycogen and so
Right.
all
So
that
that's
stuff.
the energy system that we use in
Yeah.
the initial, what, I mean,
Yes.
it varies per individual, but well,
Yeah.
10 seconds or something like that.
Yeah.
Right.
So and the thing is here, so that makes that the energy that we want to use, the explosive energies of the ATP creatine chain and the what comes after, is less available if we hyperventilate. So because you're telling the body we are dying, or we need to we need to survive, basically. So remove all that stuff. It's small, but we're chasing hundreds of seconds, right? So what's usually going to happen is you're going to burn out too early, because you're not going to be able to use that optimally. Also, it locks you in a rhythm that's not good for when you're sprinting fast. I'm talking max velocity. I mean 100, 200 meter sprints, right? Because then you're flowing, like you said. And there's more things to it. It's just interesting because we know that top speed is not a straight line. If you're measuring top speed in a curve, it's not straight. It goes up and down. And we know the dips are on the inhale, okay? Right? And exhale goes up a little bit.
Yes.
And then it goes up and up. So we don't want to breathe too much when we're running the 100 meters, so even the 200 meters, not utilize it for oxygen. We don't need to. But also, when we are driving, we're not in our top speed. So what you said you're doing, you're breathing out, and then you're kind of breathing in, and then you're breathing out, which is quite perfect. Something like that, because
right. Then I
you're
try to
exploding
prolong
out.
it. I'm not like taking
Yeah.
quick breaths. I'm trying to like hold it kind of for as long as I want, but not uncomfortably or anything like that.
Not
Just
uncomfortably, no.
with the rhythm of how I'm going, but making sure that I'm getting a deep inhale.
Yeah.
And then of course that, activates our nervous system in a way that we're not, we don't have that cortisol for that fight or flight kind of thing. Like we're not tense and like freaking out, like the parasympathetic nervous system. So we're like really kind of relaxing our body. I was listening to a neuroscientist talk about this, and he was Andrew Huberman, and he was recommending doing that as we exercise, doing this deep breathing type thing.
Yeah,
and I know
I
for
listened to him
sure
too.
100%. Oh, you heard that one? Yeah. Have you listened? Yeah,
I think
he's
he's
awesome.
great. I think he's great. Yeah.
In the 400, of course, this is extremely important because you have to be as efficient as possible. So whereas I'm running 26-second 200, I actually split 27 through my 400. So it's not that much of a difference, but I'm able to maintain that same pace for a long time, because obviously not exactly the same pace, or else I'd be running 54, which would be awesome. But I'm able to maintain it for longer because I really feel like breathing is a big part of that. So
and
even
I think that's for top
spurts,
performance. Yeah. So, and sorry to interrupt, but for top performance, I think that's the last ingredient too. If we can get that, and it's usually easier when we're in a good shape. Everything's more automatic then, through the season when you're starting to get into those top shape. Or as in when you're starting to peak, like when you're peaking, everything's more automatic, and you need less of that survival oxygen stuff.
Right.
So and here's the thing too, which is great with that, is that when you're exhaling, like for example, say you're taking a big breath and then you're exhaling on the bang of the gun, for example. Either you do it before or after, around that at least.
Right.
Same thing when you're throwing something or lifting something, like you're doing a clean, you're pop, and then you're breathing out to really exhale and get the diaphragm going and everything. And you're bracing and then you're letting go. It's ballistic. So you're pushing out through the dry phase and you're breathing out, right? And then you're going, because you need to breathe at some point, just to get the brain's going to tell the lungs sometimes you have to breathe, but you're not utilizing it, which I still think is perfect in the transition phase, because you're going up anyway, right? So you're breathing in, right? So you're going up, but then you're releasing in the top speed phase, which I said, like when you see that curve, you're hitting the top speed, you're going to go higher if you're on the exhale. And even old samurais knew this, like they're breathing out when they're firing arrows, because they know they're going to be more steady, relaxed when you're breathing out. You're a little bit more tense when you're breathing in. You're bracing again. You're bracing.
Right.
So you're going to have to maybe do it one time, but then you breathe out again. So as few times as possible, and even more important on the 200 meters, of course, because you don't want to be hyperventilating, and for several different reasons. Again, when you're doing that breathing techniques, you're utilizing your by kidneys. They're pushing out cortisol and stress, or adrenaline, sorry, and you know you're being more stressed and you're tensing up, and you know what happens on the 200 when you do that. Good night. So I
Right.
think if you can get that, the breathing part doesn't have to be exactly like everybody else does, or that there's an optimal way. Find your way of how to release your breath and pulling it in during your 100-meter runs or your sprints, and train that in practice, and you're going to be a better sprinter, I think.
Yeah, that's really
It's
awesome.
interesting.
Yeah. Okay, I had a couple just wrap up questions kind of way. So drills are important. We're definitely sorry, there's a siren. I shared the claw drill with my group last month, just standing on the fence and practicing that motion with your foot. But we won't go over all the drills because there's so many different drills. I guess there was, what else was I going to say? Any like last piece of advice? Oh, I know. Well, I'll share it with you separately, but there is a guy right now who's saying that actually optimal sprinters are crouched the whole time, not open and tall, which is really interesting. I'll send you that because I'm like, what is this guy saying? In my experience, it's always been that when you get to that top range, you want to utilize your stride, right? So by doing that, you're able to lift your knees a little bit and utilize your stride. That's another cue that I have to use at the end of my race. When I get tired, my hips start dropping. And so I kind of just think about picking my knees up almost like a high knee. So that helps me a lot at the end of my race. But yeah, so I guess, any last piece of advice you would give to someone who's just maybe wanting to start sprinting? They're usually over 20, so 30, 40, 50, 60. They want to start sprinting. Like, how would you, any piece of advice?
Sure. First of all, find a good group with a coach that can translate the knowledge you need, right? And you mentioned it before too, the injuries and such. Take your time. You don't need to run fast this year. You just need to learn the trade, and it's a lifelong learning process. You're never going to get perfect. You need to know that you're going to do about the same things too. This is not a PT workshop where they put you to do different things because it's fun to keep you buying the service. You're coming down to be faster, and you do very few things a lot of times. You got to be, if the coach gives you, we're running 60s again this week, then you take it and say, okay, coach, we're going to do it, right? And then just work on it slow. As we've been talking about, which is, I think, amazing here, is the discussion of form, which is form will keep you from being injured. You don't have to try your best and your hardest at running fast. You need to learn the form. It's not running. And if coach holds you back, it's a coach you want to hold on to, because you don't want a coach pushing you too fast. You're going to run out of space. You're going to run out of runway, and different reasons, right? So try to do that. I think that's the most important advice I can give.
That's awesome. I love it. One last thing, is there a frequency of sprinting that you recommend for someone? I recommend not doing it once a week because I feel like the weekend warriors maybe will be more prone to injury. In my warrior community, I give a short interval, a medium interval, and a long interval. Like, say, for a short sprinter, a medium sprinter, and a long sprinter. I give one of each of those that they can do 3 times a week if they want, or if they just want to do the short sprints, that's fine too. So is there I think 3 times a week is pretty good, like pretty optimal. It's not overtraining or anything like that. Do you have a recommended, or I know everyone's different, but like?
Sure. Yeah, no, I'm all for that. That's my format too.
Yeah.
I might start with 2 just to begin with, but then just as you do, I mean, 1 will be a speed session early in the week, right? And then usually the day after that, you run really slow. So that's like a tempo workout. There's no technique. It's just relaxing and getting some blood flow. And then later in the week, we do some kind of speed endurance. Maybe starting out, they just do very short speed endurance. They're not going to be able to carry their speed for 60 meters. They're not going to be able to do that. So we run really short speed endurance. And then through the weeks, we just make that longer. But 2 to 3 times per week, depending on the week and the cycle and everything, is just perfect, I think.
Awesome. Yeah. And I think you're in agreement that sprinting is an awesome way to keep fit as we age, because it taps into that, that natural, like, if you need to run from a tiger or something like that, like, I just feel like all of the people that I know that are older and sprinting are generally just more in, like better health, and their brains are sharper. And of course, the science backs that up, as why I wrote my book, to show about the BDNF, brain derived neurotrophic factor, and all the great things that come with sprinting. So I think that you're probably in the same boat, being that you're a sprinter too and you're aging, but
Yeah.
have you seen that as well with like people, or like as
Yeah,
well?
my group of masters, I
Yeah.
mean, you take them for 20 years younger than they are, and bright of mind and happy, and they're content. It
Hmm.
helps life, and we know that the science is there, and we don't have to go into that, but you're just
Yeah.
making your cells, actually your satellite cells, actually move. You need to actually move your body, and you need to do it fast or heavy. It doesn't
Hmm.
have to be max all the time. But if
Right.
we don't, then okay, then you're gonna grow old and have lots of diseases going on, and you don't want that. It's better to,
Right.
do it now while you can, but while you can, and you're gonna move that old stage later in life instead.
Yeah.
So, and live
I
healthy.
agree. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for mahalo. Thank you for being with me
Hello.
today. And this was such a great conversation. I feel like it was a gold mine. So I really appreciate it.
Oh,
Mahalo.
I appreciate it so much. Thank you so much for having me.
All
Awesome.
right. Aloha.
Aloha.